Hey there! Before we start the podcast, I need you to put down that wavebird and listen up. I need money. For a tenth of what the price of that wireless GameCube controller costs, that should be like $5 if you got it off Shop Goodwill. You can support me here at the podcast of Two Consoles Too Late. I need to buy more games. Your support gets bonus content like additional episodes, Discord server access, typewriter manifestos, and personal shoutouts on the airwaves. I actually have a typewriter. Vote on Patreon polls to see what video game I talk about next. Nothing on Atari 2600. So go to patreon.com/2consoles2late because what the world needs is more Stick It!
Hi, everybody.
Maybe what they're seeing and how they're seeing it, and also video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts.
And constant crises have shaken the entire world and have threatened in each case to bring on the gigantic conflict, which is today, unhappily, a fact.
9 programmable weapons buttons. Customizable feedback software. Don't just buy a new video game. Make one.
He doesn't have a PlayStation 5.
That's because he's Two Consoles Too Late.
Hello! Welcome to the podcast of Two Consoles Too Late. I am the host, Jackson Keebler, and I am Two Consoles Too Late. In this episode, I'm taking a look at the 16-bit Castlevania game. Not all of them, but a good portion of them. My reviews of them, my experiences with them, and with me also is Mike from the YouTube channel Dongled to talk about these games. And over on Auction Alert, we're going to take a look at the Shop Goodwills and see if there's any Castlevania games out there for sale. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's go. All right, a lot to talk about when it comes to the Castlevania 16-bit game. So we have to set this up, which kind of segues me into Stick It. I've always wanted to do a deep dive into the Castlevania franchise, and I've yet to get around to it. But this was like a big first step for me. I always wanted, like a completionist task like that, like I did with the Zelda games and did like the Year of Zelda. However, it's just Castlevania, the games are a different beast altogether. You have the original 3 on the NES, and then you have these 16-bit games, and then it sort of segues into the Metroidvanias and then your 3Ds. So there's a lot of games here. And these games are not easy. They are hard. Dracula's Curse, that game kicked my butt. And for me, the order of Castlevania games is always going to be pretty simple. It's going to be first Simon's Quest, a true Metroidvania, the beginning of the Metroidvania genre, I would say. Then Symphony of the Night, a very popular game on the PlayStation. And then, of course, the original. And I'm sure that list will change as I play, the Advanced Collection and the Dominus Collection, and maybe even the 3Ds. But that being said, let's get into this. All right, so before we start talking about the games, a couple disclaimers, as it were. As I'm talking about the 16-bit games, one big one was left out, and that is Rondo of Blood. And the reason for that is, one, I do not have a PC Engine or TurboGrafx 16. I don't have a mini console, so I was unable to play that. And it is available, the Castlevania Requiem Collection is available on the PS Store for PS4, and that includes Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night. But I've already bought Symphony of the Night on my PS3, and the additional $20 just to get, a game I already have, and a game that I would love to play, but when it comes to Rondo of Blood, it's like my last console to get will be probably a PC Engine Mini or TurboGrafx Mini. I have no desire to actually own a TurboGrafx. So Rondo of Blood is not included, and $20 doesn't sound like a lot of money, but I'd rather just, save that money for elsewhere. And disclaimer number 2, all these games had a password system, but I did not use the password system. I used save states. Yes, the miracle of save states. So how did I come to these games? So one night I decided to hate myself. I ordered Chinese takeout and decided to play Dracula X, a game I had only played once before, and I didn't really get that far into it. But for some reason, I was like, all right, let's just give this a shot. My beef with broccoli was horrible. I had to microwave my broccoli, and the gray matter that they called beef, I'm pretty sure wasn't beef. So to my local Chinese restaurant, I have to say,
Stick it!
that being said, let's dive into Dracula X. So I'm going to do things a little bit backwards. I'm actually going to give the price chart and prices for these games just to kind of set the stage of the value of these games. So Dracula X for the SNES, a loose cartridge costs $274.13, and a complete in-box copy is $1,189. That is insane. Now, I called this game also known as Rondo of Blood, but it is not Rondo of Blood. And when we talk to Mike from Dongled, we're going to go into all that. But this game is hard. It is really hard. And you can play it. You can get the original cartridge. I download the ROM for my SNES Mini. It's not included on the SNES Mini. Or you can get the Castlevania Advance Collection for Switch or PS4. Like I said, it's a little bit like Rondo of Blood, but it is not Rondo of Blood. And once again, when it comes to Rondo of Blood, that's a game I would love to play, but I would actually like to play on a mini console or actually have a physical copy for the PS4. Now, no way would I have been able to beat this game, once again, without save states. It's that hard. There's only 7 stages. However, there are different paths that you can take, and depending on those paths, you get a different ending. Now, somehow, I managed to save the ladies Annette and Maria, and you're playing as Richter Belmont. But because I read the manual and found out that one of the sub-weapons was a key, and that key was used to open doors, and I did this without YouTube. I was actually quite proud. I did not watch any walkthroughs. But the sub-weapons have all stayed the same. You have the axe, the knives, holy water, the crucifix boomerang, and the stopwatch. But the nice thing about Dracula X is that the sub-weapons can be switched out if you accidentally pick up the wrong one. This is a feature in Symphony of the Night that I absolutely loved, and they brought it into Dracula X. Now, there are special moves in Dracula X. If you press B in rapid succession, you can do a backflip, and you can jump on stairs and from stairs, which was a nice feature. And then you also have the item crash. Basically, you hit a button, and it just destroys a high damage attack. It tries to destroy everything on the screen. It's kind of useful, especially in boss fights. Now, the music of Castlevania is wonderful, and as always, the music of Castlevania Dracula X is wonderful as well. The graphics are nice and clean. The beginning of the game, there's a burning town, there's a fire background, and I believe that town is supposed to be Ajiba from Simon's Quest burning down, apparently. But due to parallax scrolling, that's a retro video game glossary word, the burning town really comes into full effect. And the definition of parallax scrolling is a web design technique where background content moves slower than foreground content as a user scrolls, creating a sense of depth and visual interest. But once again, Dracula X is super difficult and I would say punishing. There are, your typical flying bats and Medusas, and they are placed in places where your timing has to be absolutely right on this platformer, and I am not the best Castlevania player in the world. The Dracula boss fight, I found it to be pretty easy. It just takes a lot of patience, and then you just span his demon form with sub-weapons. A lot of things I did see on YouTube of reviews of this game said that the Dracula fight was kind of... a lot of people didn't like it. I didn't see any problem with it. But anyway, the speedrun record for Dracula X is 15 minutes and 43 seconds, which was amazing. Check it out on YouTube. But it took me about 2 days to beat this game, and once again, that was using the save states. All right, next up is Super Castlevania 4 for the SNES. This game loose is $49.61, and a CIB copy is $152.94. Once again, kind of a collector's item. This is a quote-unquote a 5-hour game, and it consists of 11 levels. Once again, was not able to complete it without the miracle of save states. Speedrun record, 31 minutes and 18 seconds. You play as Simon Belmont, and this is considered the unofficial sequel to Castlevania 2. Now, in this game, the timer is back. Now, if you remember the timer from the original Castlevanias on the NES, if you ran out of time, you died. That really didn't play too much into my playthroughs. I felt like I had plenty of time. I think when I first started playing it, I was taking way too much time whipping all the candles, and sometimes you just gotta let them go. But a lot of the gameplay takes getting used to. At a certain point, there are grapple points where you can shoot your whip and you can swing. So that took some getting used to, and I died numerous times on the waterfall level. But in this game, you do have a multi-directional whip, and that took a little getting used to. And you can stand in place and sort of swing your whip around to hit enemies that are close to you, and that took some getting used to. But the nice change in Super Castlevania 4 is that you could change direction mid-jump, which was a huge improvement. But once again, if you took a hit, there was a bit of that classic Castlevania blowback. But once again, this being a Castlevania game, the music is quite enjoyable. And in Stage 3-3, there was a little song, a little ditty that I enjoyed that I wanted to share here. It's called Submerged City, and personally, in my notes, I called it Flute Jam. It's very chill and sort of sets the setting of the level. So here it is, Submerged City. But as the game goes on, it gets a little hokey for my taste. Once again, we have instant death spikes, the spikes that rise and fall from the ceiling. One hit, instant death. So no blowback there. With the enhanced graphics on the 16-bit system, there was once again parallax scrolling, and you have spinning rooms. But unfortunately, with too many sprites on the screen, there was serious lag. And then there was a level with swinging chandeliers, and the platforming became a little difficult. And that's when my patience began to wane with Super Castlevania 4. The boss fights and the mini-boss fights weren't too difficult. The one that stood out was Slogra, looked a little bit like Ridley from Metroid. And in Super Castlevania, you can earn extra lives by reaching 20,000 points, and then every 50,000 points thereafter. So that was a huge help, especially, once again, with the Miracle of Save States. I did reach the end. Once I got to the Grim Reaper, I did have to look up a YouTube walkthrough where you could cheese the Grim Reaper by just holding up your whip and blocking the attacks. But after you defeat the Grim Reaper, there's an invisible platform on the way to Dracula that restores everything. You get full hearts and full health. So that helped a lot. And the Dracula fight, I have to admit, took a little bit more time than Dracula X, but I definitely defeated Dracula. But once again, that was through the Miracle of Save States. So next up is Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis. Now this game loose cartridge is $77.29, and a CIB copy is $210.56. And we're going to look at a copy of Bloodlines on Auction Alert. This game is a complete departure from quote-unquote traditional Castlevanias. Gone is the gothic settings that we're used to. You're not going through Dracula's castle. You're actually kind of jumping all over Europe. And you can play as two different characters. John Morris, who looks like a lumberjack, and Eric Lecard, who's got some sort of like pike. Speedrun record for Bloodlines is 29 minutes, 44 seconds. And John Morris and Eric Lecard are friends who witnessed the death of John Morris's father at the hands of Dracula. Now, in this game, there is no timer, which was nice. But instead of the traditional hearts you get in a Castlevania game, there are jewels. And these jewels, to me, this is just me, they look like looting cough drops. So if you knew what that looks like, every time I picked one up, I just thought, that's a cough drop. It's a very different kind difficulty. Once again, you can jump off the stairs and swing with your whip or pole vault jump with Eric Lecard. That took some getting used to, and I didn't realize you could do a whip swing until like the second or third level, where I did it kind of accidentally. But once you know that you can do that, it unlocks different areas, and you can take different paths depending on which player that you played as. I only made it to stage 3, and I barely survived. Without save states, I didn't make it past level 2. So once again, save states came huge in playing Castlevania Bloodlines. I thought the boss fights were interesting, and I thought they were very different from, once again, your traditional Castlevania. And the levels were very interesting and not your traditional Castlevania as you jump all across Europe. You start in Transylvania, then you go to Greece, then Italy, then Germany, then France, and then England. This is all taking place in 1917 during World War I, apparently. Stage 5 is kind of where I reached my limit with Castlevania Bloodlines. The difficulty ramped up way too much, and I just couldn't keep going. So I had to use a passcode to get to stage 6. And stage 6 has like these split graphics, and I thought they were kind of obtuse and annoying. But then after you get through that, then you're walking on the ceiling. And I just found that a little too gimmicky for my tastes. And then after that, it turns into a boss rush. There's the Grim Reaper, but you have to hit certain cards, and then you have to replay bosses that you've already defeated. So that I was not a fan of that. I did not beat Castlevania Bloodlines, despite my best efforts. But it was nice to play something on the Sega Genesis again and see how different Konami put together a Castlevania game on the Genesis. So before I wrap up my final thoughts on the 16-bit Castlevania games, I reached out to Mike from the YouTube channel Dongled, who publishes a lot of Castlevania content, and I want to get his impressions of the 16-bit Castlevania games here on Between the Headphones. All right, so I'm here with Mike from the YouTube channel Dongled, and we're talking about the 16-bit Castlevania games. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. I'm always up for talking about Castlevania.
Well, thanks for coming on. So anyway, backstory here. I recently just started playing the 16-bit Castlevania games for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And I started with Dracula X, and I decided after that, okay, I'm going to do Bloodlines, Super Castlevania, but I did not do Rondo.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of walked away. I mean, not really, I would say plussed or, swayed in any way. I was never a big fan of the Castlevania games.
Mm-hmm.
My go-to Castlevania games have always been Simon's Quest, Symphony of the Night, more the Metroidvania Castlevanias than the platformers. And so anyway, I was just kind of wondering what your thoughts on the 16-bit Castlevania games were.
Sure. I'm kind of in the same boat in the sense that I started with Simon's Quest, and that was the first one back in I think I played it around 1990, and just fell in love with it, and just continued playing the series over the years. Became my favorite franchise. But when it comes to the 16-bit titles, the next one that I played, so I skipped 3. On the NES, and I just immediately went to Super Castlevania 4, and I think it's a masterpiece. Personally, I think it is one of the best games ever made. Certainly one of the best on the Super Nintendo. Between the graphics, the music, just everything, and the fact that it's such an early launch title too. Like it didn't launch with the system, but it was within I believe the first year of the system coming out that the game came out. And just absolutely incredible for it to be a remake. It's a non-canon remake from what I understand, but it is.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's not canon with the franchise. I mean, back in the day, it kind of was, but they changed things later so that it wouldn't be considered canon. The first I believe the first Castlevania game is now considered canon for that version, because there's so many different versions of Castlevania 1. One of the other 16-bit entries, technically, is Castlevania on the Sharp X68000, which was called Akumajo Dracula X68000. So that came out on the Sharp X68000. It's a home computer called Sharp X68000, and that's a 16-bit computer system that came out. This came out around like 93, and in my mind, it's kind of like if the Sega Genesis had its own port of Castlevania. The reason I say that is it uses the same processing chip, the Sharp X68000. Or rather, it's a Motorola X68000, I believe, for the sound chip, or sorry, for the processing chip. So it's lightning fast when it comes to, that's that whole blast processing that they were talking about back in the day. Yeah, it's really just the Motorola chip that really drives the speed on that system.
Well, my experience is, I think maybe it's just me, but you either fall in one of two camps. Either you really like Super Castlevania, or you like Bloodlines. I think those are the big two. But
yeah,
but then like Rondo is in there.
Yeah, I've always thought that was a dumb thing to compare those two. They are so wildly different. I mean, so Bloodlines originally was not supposed to be a canon entry in the franchise. You tend to notice that what Konami was doing back in the day was they were putting together fresh teams to work on new entries of the franchise depending on the system. And each new entry, they had this, like, everything that I've read about it, they had almost like a hesitation to consider them canon, quote unquote. So they'd do these interviews, a lot of which can be found on shmuppalations.com. And in those interviews, they're just like, yeah, no, these games are not intended to be canon. So Castlevania Bloodlines was not supposed to be a canon game, but it was well received, and it kind of like retroactively got considered canon. But the game is just so different than Super Castlevania 4. I mean, Super Castlevania 4, they really pushed the boundaries with using Mode 7 on the sprites and the backgrounds and everything. Really, some impressive visual aspects that they really tried to highlight. The map being Mode 7, the spinning rooms, in like I think it's like level 5 or something like that. It is a visually captivating game, and it is just also so different from the first Castlevania on the NES. And when you compare it to Bloodlines is, first off, there's two different characters you could play as. So in Super Castlevania 4, you play as just Simon Belmont. In Bloodlines, you're playing as Eric Lacard or John Morris. John Morris gained the Vampire Killer whip, the whip that is used throughout the entire series by most Belmonts. And so the Morris family is kind of like an offshoot of the Belmonts. And so you get to pick and choose your play styles. Do you want to use the guy that uses the whip? Or do you want somebody a little bit more nimble who uses a spear, who can get to higher places a little bit easier, who can, do all these different attacks? So it really all depends on what you want to do. That game, they also had a lot of really impressive techniques and a lot of really impressive level design in Bloodlines. Bloodlines had a lot of really cool like bosses and level designs where they tried to really flip the script on what a Castlevania game, or rather a classic Vania game, was, because those are two totally different entries between classic Vania and Metroid. As it's called, Metroidvania, it's really not. I've always had a problem with that name because Koji Igarashi came out during he was talking about He was playing Symphony of the Night with 2 other people online. It's on YouTube, and he specifically says Metroid was not the basis. It was Zelda. It was A Link to the Past that was considered the basis. So everyone's calling it a Metroidvania. I get that people are like, well, yeah, but the map, the map is there, and all the backtracking and everything. I was like, listen, it's from the producer himself. Maybe there were people on the team that utilized Metroid, but clear as day, he says Zelda was the primary source. But anyways, getting sidetracked. Yeah, so Bloodlines is just very different from Super Castlevania 4. So I never understood the comparison. They're 2 totally different games. They have totally different characters, and they tell 2 totally different stories, which I can get into if you want.
Well, I mean, my experience with Bloodlines was that it was just a complete departure, I guess, from the core of a Castlevania game. But then as I'm playing them, I realize that I sort of have a bias when it comes to Castlevania games that they are Nintendo games.
Sure.
So that, to have a Castlevania game on, the Genesis or, the PlayStation or what have you, it just doesn't seem right. I found myself liking Super Castlevania more because of the traditional Gothic setting, and it didn't take place in sort of I wouldn't say a modern era. I mean, like World War I is, a lot sooner than, traditional Castlevania games.
Sure.
But I mean, just, the 2 different characters and the play styles that took some getting used to. And I didn't when you play as John Morris, I didn't know that your whip could be like an Indiana Jones thing. Like you could swing from the ceiling. I didn't realize that until I did it by mistake, on the 3rd level.
Yeah.
And it was just different, and the difficulty of that game is brutal. I mean, there were just at some points I was just like, I just feel like they were punishing you.
Yeah.
So I did not finish Bloodlines, and I had to use the passcodes just to play some of the additional levels. But I would say, for my personal taste, I liked Super Castlevania, but I think the biggest takeaway when I played all these games is that, it's not one of these games I'm going to pick it back up and be like, oh, I haven't played that in a while, I'll play it again. There's not a lot of replayability for me. Now, when it comes to when you talk about Metroidvanias, I love Metroid. I could replay any Metroid game any day of the week. But with these, I guess with these Castlevania games, I played them, I got them out of my system, and I'm probably never going to come back to them.
Oh, see, I always preferred Classicvania to Metroidvania style. That's always been my go-to. The repetitive nature of playing through the game, sure, I can understand that. It's funny because Simon's Quest being my first, but also my favorite entry in the franchise, I feel like that game always kind of teetered on both levels. It felt very Classicvania, but it also felt non-linear and more explorational. And so that's, I think, ultimately that was the blueprints for those Metroidvania games was Simon's Quest, and that's pretty undeniable. But Classicvania, to me, there's a little bit more nuance to the platforming aspects of it. So the games are more punishing. There's more of a reward, I would say, at least a personal reward for me, beating one of those Classicvania games. I just think that because the difficulty is a little bit harder, and you really are struggling not only with the platforming but also with trying to the way that everything's laid out. There's a very specific way to do things in those games when it comes to combat. So you're really, there's this fine balance between balancing the platforming aspects and balancing the combat aspects, and both of those aspects are completely lost in a Metroidvania, like a traditional, like Symphony of the Night, Circle of the Moon, Aria of Sorrow, those kind of games. And don't get me wrong, I like those games, I do, but to me, I always found Classicvanias more appealing and more exciting to play through.
All right. So I guess my next question is, so we've seen like the success of games like Metroid Dread, Mario Wonder, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. Going back to the traditional side-scrolling, sometimes Metroidvania, sometimes not. Do you think Castlevania is going to get a treatment like that? I mean, I think it would be wonderful if they did, but I'm just curious to see and just wanted to get your thoughts.
I hope not. um, you know, I think the biggest problem that Castlevania is facing right now is, identity-wise, it has two very separate identities. And most people fall into the Metroidvania style. So I think what a lot of fans are really pushing Konami to do is to make another Metroidvania game in that style. But here's the problem with that. We already had years and years and years and years worth of that. So to me, ultimately, if they're going to come out with a new Castlevania game, it needs to, for one, I think that if they're going to do something, they're probably going to end up doing, I don't think they'll do a new entry in the series. I think they'll just do remakes.
Okay.
And
like remasters?
I wouldn't say remasters. I think they're going to do full-on remakes of certain games. And I think that they're going to do what Lords of Shadow should have been, which is originally that game was going to be a remake of Super Castlevania 4. And
okay, I didn't. Yeah,
and they ended up not doing it. I don't know why, but they didn't do it. So it became its own alternate universe and its own alternate reality. And I'm pretty confident that they are abandoning the Lords of Shadow series at this point because there's been such a focus on the original timeline, the original characters. So if they're going to make something new, it's probably going to be a remake of maybe the first Castlevania game again.
okay.
So that's what I would expect them to do, and it'll be a 3D remake. Now, they may not want to do that. They may not want to sink that much money into the franchise again because they've been really playing it safe as of late with the compilations. They did remake Haunted Castle, which was the arcade game that had a really terrible reputation, and they remade it completely. And it's a great game. M2 is the developer on it, and they've been doing all these compilations of all these classic, Castlevania games. And, so it's very strange, the Castlevania franchise when it comes to the fandom, because I really feel like we're all split. There's the classic Vania camp, and then there's the Metroidvania camp. And then you have a small, like, interlopers, in the middle somewhere of the 3D games. So you've got like the Castlevania 64, Legacy of Darkness, Curse of Darkness, and Lament of Innocence. And so those games also have their own fan base, and fan bases split on those as well. To me, personally, Castlevania, the franchise that I loved the most, the aspects of it probably died with Legacy of Darkness. Like that's the last, to me, the true. It would have been Castlevania Resurrection had that come out on the Dreamcast, but it got canned. So to me, Castlevania Legacy of Darkness was the final, I guess you could say, the final real entry in the series, because it it really felt part of what those developers were doing, where they were handing it off to a new team to create something brand new.
Right. I mean, with the Netflix series, I'm kind of curious, like how many people are coming to the video games because of that. But that's sort of like a whole other topic altogether.
Let's not even go there, because the series, the anime series, is so polarizing that I even the seasons themselves, I was a fan of the first series and I was not a fan of the second series. So even that is very polarizing depending on who you talk to.
I think I'm in the same camp.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. But I have some other questions for you in the general field of video games,
Sure.
if you
I
don't
know we
mind.
didn't even talk about Rondo or Dracula X. Those are, if you wanted to touch on those, we could also talk about those too.
Yeah, I mean, like I didn't play Rondo,
Mm-hmm.
just because I don't have a PC Engine.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I could have gotten the Requiem edition, but this sort of segues me into like my video game questions.
Cool.
I if I get the Requiem edition, I'd want to get it like a physical copy, and
Sure.
it's just a little cost prohibitive. So
I hear you.
I skipped Rondo, but I know there's like a big fan base for Rondo.
Mm-hmm.
Dracula X was just like, apparently it's Rondo Blood Light.
No,
So
it's not.
uh,
It's a completely different, like, so eh, people think that it's like a light version of it or a harder version of it. It's a totally different game. The levels are totally different. The basic story is there, but even the story they got wrong, especially in the North American version. The during the cutscenes in the beginning, they totally ruined the canon on the game. The Maria is Annette's sister instead of being like a long lost. It's weird.
yeah.
You know what I mean? But like Dracula X is difficult for sure. It's still worth playing through, in my opinion. And I did a whole video comparing the two versions. Comparing Rondo, but it really is a different game. So people need to stop saying it's just people don't really understand it because they haven't. They either think it because they haven't played it, but when you really sit down and play it, they're two totally different games.
Yeah, I mean, all these games, when I played them, I had to use save states. I was playing them on mini consoles so that
They're
I
tough,
had
yeah.
that option available. But like I was saying about when I was talking about physical copy of Requiem, how do you feel about physical media? I mean, are you physical or digital? Do you have a preference?
I'm mostly physical, but things have really changed, especially with the way that things are now with gaming. I am leaning more into digital in the aspect of I'm only with the way that prices are and the way that it's just not worth it to me to buy every single game physically. There are some games that I'm like, like an indie game will come out and I'll want to play it, and I don't want to wait 8 months to get a physical copy of it from like a limited run or like a whatever, strictly limited games or whatever the company is, Play Asia. I just want it right then and there. So, if it's a game that like I have some interest in, but it's not like something that I want to keep forever, I just won't buy it physically. I'll just buy it digitally. If it's something that there'll be situations where like I'll buy a game digitally and I'll love it so much that I'll want it physically. Like a good example of that's like Panzer Paladin. I loved that game, and I bought it digitally, and so I was like, all right, I'm gonna buy it physically too. So when back in the day when the limited run thing came out for it, I bought the physical copy of it as well. But I'm also kind of like selling a lot of my physical stuff right now because I'm just looking at it and I'm like, I'm looking at especially some of these Capcom collections that are coming out, and I'm like, I've got these games sitting on my shelf, and they're worth like hundreds of dollars, and I could get the same game on a collection for $30 and get like 10 different games. So a lot of my fighting games I've sold because I'm just like, I don't. Why would I keep this on my shelf? It's not worth it unless I have some sort of like personal interest in the franchise itself. I'm just gonna sell it. And take the money and then use it towards something else that I want,
All right.
Yeah.
And what is your favorite video game controller?
I'd probably say I'm trying to think. It's tough. I really, really love the Wii U Pro controller. That's one of my favorites. I really like that controller. It just feels really nice and smooth. The buttons are all work really well. I use it like, I've got it right here, and I use it like all the time on my Switch. I don't have a Switch Pro controller. I just use that controller. I just plug it in. through the 8-bit Duo or 8-bit Do, and I just plugged that into the adapter into my Switch dock, and I just used that. So I love that controller.
I bought one of those just specifically so I could play Twilight Princess HD. I love that controller too.
Yeah.
All right. And lastly, the big question is, what is your favorite soft drink?
Soft drink, Mountain Dew Baja Blast, legit for sure, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any particular reason or?
I've just always loved it. It's always been my go-to when I go to Taco Bell. So I joke around with my friends about it too. Like we have inside jokes about Baja Blast and talking about Baja Blast. So yeah, I'd go with Baja Blast.
All right. And where can we find you on the internet?
Yeah, I'm on the interwebs on YouTube. Just type in Dongled, or just it's youtube.com/Dongled. That's my primary channel, where I do primarily a lot of Castlevania stuff or Castlevania adjacent stuff, games that are inspired by Castlevania. And then I do some other stuff too. I've got over 100 reviews that I did with my show, my skit-based show, Dude, You Haven't Played This Game, which is slowly but surely becoming less skit-based now. But I also host a podcast called XVGM Radio. So if you like video game music and you want a podcast, that has over 100 episodes as well. I co-host that with my friend Justin, and you could get that on that YouTube site or xvgmradio.com.
Cool. I'm definitely going to check that out. I think up and coming, my next games I'm going to go into the Advanced Collection and the Dominus Collection, and because I've yet to play those except for Symphony of the Night, so I have high hopes for those Castlevania games.
Yeah, those games are great. I'm not a fan of the Sorrow games, the Aria of Sorrow and Dawn of Sorrow. They just feel the most not Castlevania to me. They take place in the future. And they're just weird. They're not bad games. They're just, I don't know. They're well-made games. They're just not my taste. But like Harmony of Dissonance is fantastic. Order of Ecclesia is probably my favorite handheld, Metroidvania. And Portrait of Ruin is great too. So there's some really great games in those collections.
I'm looking forward to it. All right, Michael, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Castlevania.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
So thank you once again, and namaste to Mike from the YouTube channel Dongled. Be sure to check out his channel. A lot of good content there and a lot of good insight from Mike. But before we wrap up here this episode on the 16-bit Castlevania games, we have to head on over to the Shop Goodwills and see what's going on and see if there's any of these games available.
Auction. Alert.
So at the time of this podcast, I did a search for Castlevania on the Shop Goodwills, and none of the 16-bit games came up, but I did find some sold listings. And recently, a copy of Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis, a loose cartridge, sold for $50. But the label is seriously damaged. Looks like there was probably some rental stickers on this thing and they got peeled away. But the fact it went for $50 is pretty impressive. So I went back into the sold listings to see what other 16-bit games sold. A CIB copy of Castlevania Bloodlines with the manual sold for $156.47. And also a copy of Super Castlevania 4 for the Super Nintendo, complete in box. This looked really good. Went for only $131, so someone made out there. But that's the only copies of the 16-bit Castlevania games I found. Once again, like I said earlier, even loose, these games are not cheap. But there are other ways to play them. Once again, you can play them through emulation on the mini consoles. Bloodlines was included on the Sega Genesis Mini. Super Castlevania 4 is included on the SNES, and I downloaded the ROM for Dracula X. One more auction I need to talk about, though. This one is current. There is a TurboGrafx console available. At the time of this podcast, it's up to $150.99. It's coming out of the Goodwill of North Georgia. It is in the title. It says it was unable to test. So if you are looking for a TurboGrafx 16, one can be had. But if I breach and go on and get a PC Engine or a TurboGrafx 16, I'm definitely just going to pick up a mini console. But with tariffs and everything right now, that's not really doable. So anyway, these games can be had once again on the shop Goodwills. All right, so I gave these games the Deserted Island test. And I said, okay, if I was stuck on a deserted island with one of these 16-bit Castlevania games, which one would I play? And my answer is none of them. If it had to be one, it'd probably be Rondo of Blood, because there's different outcomes, different endings, and different playable characters and different paths that you can take. But once again, I did not play Rondo of Blood. I have a bias when it comes to Castlevania games. I always think of them as Nintendo games, even though Symphony of the Night was on the PlayStation and the Saturn, and Rondo of Blood was exclusive to the TurboGrafx 16. But for me, once again, these games really have no replayability. There's never going to be a night where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to sit down and play Castlevania 4 again. I played it through the miracle of save states, and I quote-unquote beat it. Would I like to get better at it? Yeah, sure, but not enough. Super Castlevania 4 introduced some new things that were really nice, the multi-directional whip and all that. Bloodlines got away from the traditional Castlevania formula and the gothic setting. But all these games remain difficult linear action platformers. And I think I'd rather play the Metroidvania Castlevanias. So once again, those are on the Advanced Collection and the Dominus Collection. And those are two games that I have been on the list, but it's a huge investment, around about $100. But I recommend playing them. They sort of harken back to the original Castlevania games on the NES. But there is a departure point after these games where you go towards the Metroidvanias and then eventually the 3Ds. All right, so once again, thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you and namaste to Mike from the YouTube channel Dongled for coming on and talking about these games. You can check out me on the interwebs. Just type in 2 Consoles Too Late, and there I will be found. Be sure to check out the Patreon once again and get the Miracle of Save States magnets. Next weekend, I will be in Philly at Thy Geekdom Con, giving my panel on retro video gaming and podcasting. But as always, have a good one. I love you, and goodbye.